Welcome back. Our final session today is titled Bridging Generations, Understanding and Supporting the Modern Young Adult. Our speaker is Francie Dávila, a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of the nonprofit of Kauaʻi Mental Health Advocates. Francie was called to Kauaʻi in 2010 and has since established a foundation rooted in service to support the mental health needs of our communities. Please welcome Francie Dávila.
Let's give her a big round of applause. Can you guys pretend like it's really loud? Can I get a chee-hoo? Who can give me a chee-hoo? Yes, thank you. All right, mahalo, Francie. And it's nice to see you. Thank you so much. I just saw Francie when I was doing a 10X talk. It was really fun. We were sitting next to each other. Thank you. And then you click down. Down to go next? Okay. You want to switch off?
Phew. I got to take a deep breath over here, ground myself. I got a soda light. I also have an amethyst. I'll probably be holding on to these throughout while I'm talking. Okay. So I guess I can start with the introductions while we're waiting for our slides to come, because that is an easy one. I just want to say aloha. My name is Francie Dávila, and standing beside me is Chelsea Shockley. We'll be presenting on young adulthood, entitled Bridging Generations, Understanding and Supporting the Young Adult. Now, let's get to know us just a little bit more. So I am a licensed clinician. I'm a supervisor, community organizer, and a business owner. That's a new one. Back in 2018, myself and two other amazing wahines stepped up to meet the need of a mourning community after a number of tragic losses that occurred throughout the island. Kauaʻi Mental Health Advocates, also known as KMHA, was established to support Kauai's mental health communities with a mission and vision of destigmatizing concepts around mental health through clinical, educational, and advocacy services. While starting off in community outreach and organizing, KMHA has evolved into an inspiring mental health clinic, which I'm very, very proud about, which houses a team of clinicians and blossoming mental health professionals. Through our program, known as Pathways for Mental Health Professionals, KMHA is able to support local clinicians and practitioners, along with offering accessible services for more residents throughout Hawaii, especially here on Kauai. I'm now standing alone, and I wanted to introduce the gal that was standing right beside me. And so I might take a minute and keep on grounding over here. I will say my mom's in the crowd right now. She's the one that just won the candle, I guess. And she's a very proud mama. She's the one with the suit jacket on right now, which is so interesting. Over here, yes. All right, folks, we're going to continue on. I'm going to just bring us over to our team. Okay, I told you a little bit about Kauaʻi Mental Health Advocates and how it was conceived. All right, I want to now introduce you to the lady that is standing beside me. Beside me is Chelsea. She is a graduate level candidate working towards her master's in transpersonal counseling from Naropa University and is currently interning with KMHA. Thank you. Chelsea has a uniquely curated background in psychology, yoga, and meditation, as well as programmatic development in the tech industry, which is why it went as fast as it did in certain ways over there, I guarantee. She harbors an innate sense of identity and human emotion that had her naturally pursue a clinical future in supportive healing that accounts for mind, body, and spirit. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge Nicole Walsh. She is a recent MSW graduate from the University of Hawaii Manoa. She's there on the far left, and she recently joined the KMH team after being an intern for her final year in graduate school, and has assisted Chelsea and I in the visuals of our presentation. All right, so let's get into it. Now, I'd first like to begin with an analogy and some guided imagery. Now, we live in an abundantly vivacious environment surrounded with luscious life that is embedded into the aina that harbors all of us. I want you to imagine the vibrant flowers that exist throughout Kauai's mountains, valleys, pastures, and bodies of water. Imagine the beautiful colors, shapes, smells that these flowers emanate. From birds of paradise to heliconias, hibiscuses, gardenias, plumerias, pikakis, my very favorite, avapuhis, my mother's the orchid. Each are so salient in such a special way, just like you and I. Now, I want you to pick your favorite of those flowers. It's important to be the favorite for this analogy. I want you to imagine yourself as that flower. You are that flower. Okay, lock that in now. Now let's consider your life cycle as that flower. From fragile seedlings to promising buds, and eventually the excited blossoms to those of strong stalk and or seed-bearing stages, to finally the maturely bloomed, and we cannot forget even the beauty of the wilting flower. Imagine yourself at every stage of that flower's life. What stage would you say that you are currently in? I want you to hold on to that image of that flower who is you, and perhaps consider that we are currently sitting in a garden of beautiful flowers. Now, the second thing that I want to do is some storytelling. Don't worry. Chelsea is going to come with some ravishing data and research in just a minute, but first I want to lay the scene. When we use a generational lens, I am technically a millennial wahine. When finally turning 18 with now the privilege of voting and a more lax curfew, I was taught that now as a young adult, life would come with realities, responsibilities, but also consequences that weren't anything like how I previously had experienced. Now, when I was younger, millennials were assumed to be lazy with a questionable work ethic. I want us to consider what has been said about Generation Z. Millennials were also educated, but it came with immense debt. A decade ago, whenever elders would equate me as a millennial, I have to admit I often felt a twinge of shame for the generation that I was connected to. Alas, I had to find my way in the world, my voice amongst my peers, elders, and also the seedlings, and develop the skills that you are now witness to as I bloom. I was raised by a bold and resilient baby boomer wahine. As her hearing fades and her hair has transitioned into different grays, her bloom has matured into a seed-bearing stage as she pours her love, time, and energy into the youth today. Thank you, Mom. Living through the civil rights movement and Vietnam War, and then being forced to marry, once learning that she was pregnant at the age of 22, her developmental young adult years were starkly different than my own. While she grew up during the drug revolution, I grew up during the war against drugs. And while she shifted from Catholicism to a truth as a believer in Jesus Christ, her Savior, I shifted from Christianity to a pre-colonial indigenous practice with the guidance of Great Spirit and blessings from my ancestors. Now, as a millennial, I had different choices, life experiences, and beautiful opportunities that didn't bind me to a family life that I have always loved, but in a more unconventional way. I have helped raise my Hanai niece, who is now 19 years old and probably at home right now, gearing up for a weekend full of video games with her friends and online community. She knows how to navigate a majority of digital platforms better than myself and my baby boomer mom any day. But she doesn't know what an outline to an essay is. Raised in a single-parent household and never stimulated by anything really at school other than art, she now attends this very institution where we are gathered. Now, we were all at my house last weekend when something happened. My niece, the Gen Z, came by to work on an essay. I, the millennial, was cooking dinner, supervising the homework session, and was really grateful that cable TV and lei making could entertain my mom, the baby boomer, while everything was going on. Now, after 2.5 hours of my niece working, the young adult, she had only produced 2 out of 5 of the paragraphs of her essay, which would have taken me 10 minutes. Her frequent periods of zoning out or texting her boyfriend, along with statements of not knowing how to write an essay, defeated by punctuation, and declining guidance in streamlining the process, began to inadvertently impact me. I thought I had done everything right. I had given her choice of working independently or getting assistance from my mother or I. I made sure that she was hydrated. She had endless amounts of snacks. I checked on her periodically, but also gave her space. So when she told me that she was going home only after 2 paragraphs were completed, I had some stern thoughts and feelings that I conveyed to her. And probably not in the prettiest of ways. Perhaps that was when my flip went up over here, okay? Least to say, it didn't convince her to stay and get more done, but it only sped up the process for her to depart. Well, I was frustrated that yet again, she had avoided responsibility rather than leaning into it. Something didn't settle within me. The next 24 hours would be an important processing period as I moved through my evening and following day, all the while regulating waves of emotions and thoughts that were my own, but also perhaps my niece's. Now I'm gonna leave these 3 flowers at their different blossoming stages here for now so that they can grow their roots a little. And I want us to move on. Okay. So why is it important to focus on this demographic age range of young adults between the ages of 18 to 25? Though sometimes when we think of young adults, it can range a little, but we'll stick to 18 to 25 here. We believe it's because young adults are a part of a dynamic transformational transition that makes such a pivotally defining demographic. The way young adults come of age sets the tone, not just for their lives, but for the societies that they will carry forward. For the individual, it sets patterns that repeat over their lifetimes. For families, it reshapes relationships, roles, and interdependence. And for communities, it determines the resilience and the well-being of our collective future. When young adults thrive, we all thrive. But when they struggle, the ripple effect profoundly impacts every layer of society. I want you to consider a potted plant growing within the confines of a controlled environment. Sometimes we may anticipate its rate of growth and believe that it's ready to be placed or to be planted in the ground before it actually is. If we plant that flower and its roots or personality are not strong enough yet to endure the raw elements of nature, what will happen to that plant? Will it survive? Will it thrive? There's a part of it that does, I'm sorry. I looked up for a second. Does it have everything it needs in order to bud, blossom, and be a part of the garden? Or does it need more time within the safety of that pot so that it can brave the elements when it is ready? With that, I'll hand it off to Chelsea, who will walk us through the research. Thank you.
Okay. So before we can actually talk about how to support young adults in their transition to adulthood, it helps to understand the period of young adulthood. And we can do this through a series of different lenses, which then, of course, we can compare back to the life cycle of a flower. So let's start with the biology. And we can think of the biology as the seed of the flower, full of potential, waiting to bloom. What's important to understand about the biology during this period, and we've heard this before, is that the brain is still very much under construction, with a lot of its functions not maturing until the late 20s. What's notable here is what neuroscientists call the dual systems model. And that means that the reward circuits of the brain mature earlier than the prefrontal cortex. So if you will, for a moment, picture a vehicle with a gas pedal like a Ferrari, but a brake system like a bicycle. This is young adulthood. And then we layer on puberty, which adds to that intensity. Hormones are surging, making young people extra sensitive to rewards, peers, emotions. So biologically, this stage is really wired for growth, for creativity, and for vulnerability all at once. So if we think back to the story that Francie shared about her niece zoning out during writing her essay, and then we layer on this lens of biology, we have to wonder, was it just laziness, or was it also a little bit of biology in action? Okay, so if biology is the seed, then psychology is the plant taking shape, the way it will branch and grow. There are a lot of beautiful theoretical frameworks that describe the emerging adult, so we'll just touch on a few. The first is identity. So Erik Erikson explained this stage of life as identity versus role confusion, with the central question being, who am I? Once the individual is able to answer that question, they can then go out into the world and build relationships without losing their sense of self. Also developing in this moment are cognition and morality. As most enter adulthood, we can now think abstractly, plan ahead, and start to reason about fairness. So now morality becomes less about just following the rules and more about living by a set of principles. And if we look at emerging adulthood through motivational theory, we see that young adults are in a season of primary control, which means that they're shifting their external environment to meet their internal goals. So this might look like going to school, trying out different places to live, or different romantic partners. When we age, when we're older, we'll shift into a different season where now we're adapting what's inside to meet what we've already cultivated outside. So psychologically, this is really the season to test, to push, and to reach. So again, if we think back into the situation in the story that Francie shared about her niece, and we look through a psychological lens, we have to wonder, was she being defiant? Or was she experimenting? testing out her own developing sense of identity, her new cognitive abilities, and even moral reasoning. And of course, growth doesn't happen in a vacuum, just like the plants need the soil and the sunlight and the climate. Young people grow within an environment that surrounds them. American psychologist Yuri Bronfenbrenner reminds us that growing up happens in a series of contexts. So if we imagine the individual at the center of a variety of concentric circles, we'll see the closest to us are our family and our peers, and then we have the connections between those things, the institutions like workplaces or school, the larger culture, and finally, the historical moment or the era that we're born into. So his point here was simple but powerful. It was that development is never just about the individual, it's about the environment that surrounds them. And of course, adulthood looks different depending on who you are. Some cultures mark it by age, others by ritual, others by responsibility. But the point is, adulthood isn't just one thing. It's about how your community recognizes and integrates you. So, how do we integrate young adults today? Is it the same way that we were integrated? Maybe, maybe not. In order for this integration to truly be successful, we need to consider their context. So we ask ourselves the next question, which is, how has young adulthood evolved? So we often talk about this evolution through generational differences. Generations are cohorts of people who are born around the same age and are shaped by big cultural forces. But generations aren't just shaped by culture, they also shape culture. And the caution is this: stereotypes tend to be a lot louder than actual data, so it's more accurate to think of each generation as growing in a different cultural soil rather than having any kind of fixed traits or seeds, so to speak. And I want to talk about the seeds, and I'm going to go into some of this data, but I just want to say that these data sets are coming from mainstream US publications, and they're limited by the populations that are accessible for research. And also, the human experience is quite complex, and if we are to look at how it's shifting over time, I tried to organize my thoughts, and since I'm a psych nerd, I did so by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So if you're following some of these and you're like, I've seen that before, that's where it's coming from. Okay, so back to the seeds. So although our biology hasn't shifted much over the past few generations, we are seeing some changes. For example, puberty is starting earlier, with the average age for females starting now at 12 instead of 16. So people are looking grown before their brains or their social roles catch up, which really can create psychological and physiological vulnerabilities. Also notable, our brains are developing in a digital world. Some research suggests that heavy screen use, which is defined as 7 hours a day or more, is linked to more anxiety, depression, and weaker emotional regulation. So this is just a little bit of data, but it suggests that our soil might actually be reshaping how bodies, brains, and emotions can continue to develop. The family system has also seen a shift over the past few decades. In the baby boom era, families averaged nearly 4 kids. Today, it's closer to 1.6, and many young adults don't expect to have children at all. Households are far more diverse, with stepfamilies, single parents, non-marital births, LGBTQ+ families, and chosen kin all more common. Like Europe and East Asia, the US has a below replacement fertility level, but it stands out for having the highest single parent rate. So what we're seeing here is that, family is still central. but it's smaller, it's more complex, and it's more varied than in past generations. Work has also transformed. Millennials now hold the largest share of the workforce, and Gen Z is rising as our baby boomers retire. But job stability has declined, with the average job tenure now under 4 years. Remote and hybrid work were once a niche, and now they're a norm. And younger people are wanting flexibility and meaning, not just stability and a paycheck. So the picture here is more fluid, less loyalty to one employer and more emphasis on alignment and adaptability. Housing and the economy might be the sharpest generational divide. When baby boomers bought homes, they cost about 2.5 times income. Today, it's more than double that, at around 5.6, and actually it's higher now. Millennials at age 35 had a 43% home ownership rate compared to over 50% for baby boomers. And renters are struggling too. Half are cost burdened, and 1 in 4 are spending more than half of their income on housing. Add in student debt with an average of $38,000 and a wealth gap where baby boomers hold over half of the household wealth while millennials only hold 5%. And you can see why younger adults are delaying milestones like marriage and home ownership. Our young adults are also growing up in a shifting political climate. Baby boomers grew up trusting government. 77% did in the 60s. Now it's just 22%. Younger generations seem to be leaning left, and Gen Z in particular is reshaping politics through a high voter turnout and digital activism. So the shift we're seeing here is one from high trust and institutional stability to low trust but high engagement, which could be reshaping our civic life. Friendships have gone digital, with Gen Z making close friends online, but they're also the loneliest generation. And at the same time, belonging is widening, with Gen Z being the most diverse generation in US history and leading cultural shifts around gender and identity and expanding the circle of who belongs. Like I mentioned before, identity work has always been a key task of young adulthood, but now the conditions are louder and more complex. Older generations settled their identity quickly with jobs or family. Now the pause stretches longer, giving young adults space, but also adding stress. Many young adults come out with parts of their identity earlier, but many face stigma earlier as well. And with hours spent on social media, exploration mixes with comparison. So it's no surprise that Gen Z reports higher rates of anxiety and depression. So identity is still about finding coherence, but now in a much more visible world. And finally, meaning has shifted across the generations. For baby boomers, it was family, faith, and steady work. Gen Z is less tied to religion. Only a third identify as Christian, but nearly 80% call themselves spiritual, often finding purpose in mindfulness or activism. Younger generations want alignment between their values and their choices, from their jobs to brands. And yet 42% still struggle with meaning. So purpose has always been universal, but younger generations are searching for it in a more individual and activist way. So there we have it. The data tells the story of a changing landscape, and our call to action is about shaping what comes next. So I'll pass it back to Francie to take us home.
I was a little behind on those slides at the end. I'm sorry. All right. Thank you, Chelsea. Okay. When learning about a subject that directly impacts us and the people that we care about, folks will often naturally go into solution-based dialogue. So then an appropriate contemplative step would be, how can we support the future generations of stable and thriving adults? I want to challenge us to learn more on how our roles as effective assets have the ability to bridge the gap in establishing stable growth into adulthood. First, it's important for us to be self-aware regarding our location and lens when supporting young adults. This requires us to be mindful of who we are and where we are located in comparison to others. Let's consider the scenario with my niece. While I was aware that she doesn't have a passion for school, I was unaware that because education has played such an important role in establishing stability for my own life, I was triggered by her level of engagement with schooling. And when triggered, it was my mom's voice that echoed in my outlook of how I viewed my niece. It wasn't until I processed with my mom and heard her reiterate viewpoints from when I was a young adult that I realized the lens I was defaulting to and the stance I had taken. Where I came from and how I was raised taught me a viewpoint that has become reactive through my behaviors and that became limiting to my niece. But my consciousness understands that those thoughts and behaviors are not the solution that will be most effective in supporting her development. Now, to do so, intergenerational connection with emotional attunement needs to be established, which is beneficial for everyone. In action, this looks like respectful dialogue with mutual listening, validation, and the space for her to explore without my limiting impositions. This entails a skill set of patience that apparently I still haven't mastered yet, and I guess that this is where I'm developing as well. So not only do I need to be patient with her development, but also with mine. When I reflect on my mom's development, now slow and steady, and my own development, perhaps a bit quicker, but less finessed at times, I'm able to see that my niece's development, which is extremely resilient, may need more time than we did. And that's certainly acceptable, right? With some reflection, I was able to identify that one day I won't be here to guide or rescue my niece. How many of you have thought that about younger ones? I realized I don't fully trust her sovereignty and autonomy just yet. My behaviors revealed this projection of fear, which hinders the soil of her potential. I don't want to do that. There's a term that I love to teach called equifinality. Does anybody know what that term means? Awesome. Okay. Equifinality refers to the concept that there are multiple methods and pathways to achieving the same outcome. I like to also look at it like there's a final destination that we're all trying to get to, but there are too many roads, pathways, and routes for all of us. We all have our own individual route to get to that final outcome. Okay? So when we look at the autonomy and sovereignty of young adulthood and hesitate to trust their routes and pathways, it could be helpful to remember that through equifinality, they'll find their way, as we have. And finally, we must continue to advocate for appropriate mental health programs, services, and resources, of course. Accessibility has become more limited throughout the systems we exist in, which limits opportunity for stable growth and development. And when Generation Z, being more open about mental health than any other generation before, it's our responsibility to meet it with accessible care, destigmatization, and policies that support well-being in schools, workplaces, and communities. So how can we do this if we have limited capacity, though? It's by attending spaces and events such as these, connecting with like-minded and active communities, as well as coalitions and cohorts, and simply being brave enough to call out and keep accountability. To conclude, defining adulthood isn't just an academic exercise. It's about the kind of world that we create and also leave behind. Today's young adults are growing in soil that is different from what many of us knew. But our job is not to rush the seed or scold the plant for how it is bending. Our job is to tend the soil, to give patience, safety, and nourishment so that the next generation and those thereafter can thrive. When we do that, we're cultivating the health of our whole garden and the world that we share. Mahalo nui loa for having us and giving us this opportunity to plant some new seeds. Thank you, Ray, for saying yes. And if you have any questions or comments, Chelsea and I will be here, my mom as well. And I'm going to give it back to you folks. Mahalo.
We're super lucky to have you here today. Mahalo, and I'm glad we had it together. So mahalo again to, thank you for presenting. Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you again to Kauaʻi Community College. I'm so sorry about the technical difficulty earlier. If you do, please give me your green sheet, or you can turn it in at the end. I do have some extra stickers, so I just want to, if you do turn in your sheet to me, then I will give you a sticker, or you can take it to the back. As I just wanted to say mahalo, and thank you once again for attending the 3rd annual Ola Pono o Kauaʻi Conference. Please remember, again, to turn in your evaluation forms before you leave. And this concludes our conference. Ray, I think you have some comments, yes? Okay.
So on behalf of the Kauaʻi Rural Health Association, again, we thank you guys for coming and joining us today. You know, I was asked a question earlier, says, well, why are you guys always talking about mental health? And I described it to them as kind of a domino effect. And what I mean by that is if we resolve, or we can treat and resolve a lot of the mental health issues, it'll have a domino effect on resolving other social issues, drug addiction, homelessness, all these other kinds of problems that we have. So that's one of the reasons why we've been focusing a lot on mental health, as well as when they did, I think, a statewide research on what was really the issue for a lot of our communities. Everybody said mental health at the time. And of course, this was following the pandemic and all of that stuff as well, too. So, but again, you know, thank you, folks. And we'll see you folks hopefully next year at our next mental health conference. Okay, thank you.
There you go. You have a great day. Mahalo.